Good day, everyone. It's Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice, and it's June 22nd as we're into summer. Well, with all the news about mass graves and corruption in high places, just the norm, of course, in Canada, but I've written a reflection on that with some new information that you might find very interesting. And of course, I'm joined today with my good buddy William Coombs here, and we'll have more to say to him. If you don't know about him already, he died in the St. Paul's Hospital after going public with his knowledge of Queen Elizabeth abducting children out of the Kamloops Indian School. But his spirit doesn't die. He's our brother still, and he fights alongside us. My reflection today is entitled, Joe Pesci, Murray Sinclair, and Me, Recent Insights into Body Dumping and More. Well, the scene from the film Goodfellas might have been set in Canada rather than the Bronx. Three gangsters are on a late-night trip to dig up and cut up one of their victims whose buried remains are threatened with discovery. One of them, portrayed by none other than Joe Pesci, insists on stopping down first for some chow at his mom's place before they do the digging. At one point, when they're sitting around the dinner table, Joe holds up a huge carving knife and he says, "Hey Ma, can I borrow this? A friend of ours needs it." Well, as his fellow Goombas explode with laughter, Joe's nice mother smilingly obliges, as oblivious as your average Canuck. In a mass grave as big as Canada, tragedy slips easily into farce, like that example, all the time. Once more, we are experiencing the stale, stuck note of credulity alongside crime. Now that the news is broken about the children's remains in Kamloops that were, quote, discovered by the very people who put them in the ground. In truth, what was exposed to the world on May 27th was not simply 215 little corpses, but a standard cleanup operation that had gone wrong. And we have a stool pigeon to thank for that. Well, for the throngs of you who don't know how things work in Canada, let me explain. The RCMP and their native band council Goombas have been hard at work for at least half a century, pillaging and pulping any small bones they find from the crime scenes that they help make at over 100 Catholic, Anglican, and United residential schools. Their late-night body cleanups, like the government and churches' shredding of documents and killing of eyewitnesses, are part of their mandate as Crown agents. It's just business as usual. But things went off the rails after they uncovered the Kamloops mass grave. Somebody squealed to the press. A somebody right within the Kamloops Band Council. Well, even before I'd heard these sordid details, I knew that something even more crooked and contrived than usual was up when Big Murray Sinclair arrived. The very day after the Kamloops site was reported in the press, Murray's chubby countenance was splashed across the corporate media quicker than you can say official cover-up. Well, for all of you who suffer from 3-second memory, Murray Sinclair was the former Manitoba judge and top apple who engineered the notorious obstruction of justice misnamed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. As his lordly presiding demonstrated during the years 2009 and 2015 when he chaired the TRC, Murray won the nickname the Slasher because he had this tendency to cut off the microphones of any residential school survivors who began naming the names of their torturers. And he also censored out of the TRC official record any call for the prosecution of the guilty churches. Well, no wonder he had done so well as a judge in Manitoba. Personally, I figure that Murray was even more crazy than usual under the burden of not only his considerable weight, but his official role of Canadian Holocaust denier. Like the time that he claimed that half the interned children in the res schools had died, but then turned around and said, no, it was only actually 2 or 3%, contradicting their own records. Well, of course, issuing the big lie is not only a standard tool of a politician's trade, but one that is routinely rewarded, something that the Canadian government proved very gratefully when it then went on to appoint Big Murray to the Senate after he had performed his hatchet job on all those living and dead Indians. Well, naturally, the emergence of the BM after his retirement to the Elysian Fields smelled to me of simply being part 2 of the TRC, otherwise known as that ridiculous cover-up. And sure enough, Fat Boy did not disappoint us. By early June, Murray was giving away the plan by announcing that the Mohawk School in Brantford, Ontario will likely be the next in line for an official excavation. Well, say no more, Tonto. The Anglican Mohawk school, known as the Mush Hole to its victims, was the site of the only independent excavation ever done at a Canadian residential school mass grave. It was done by yours truly and a host of unbought traditional Mohawk elders in the fall of 2011. Well, we unearthed bones there, and we had them analyzed at the Smithsonian Institute. You can see it all at murderbydecree.com. And at the Smithsonian Institute, they came to the conclusion of the 9 bones we sent, 3 of them were human. One of them, in fact, positively identified as that of belonging to a young girl. Now, this amazing fact that for the first time in history, bones had been uncovered and identified from a residential school mass gravesite, totally censored and ignored out of the Canadian media. Only the Mohawk Community paper reported the event. So when you think about it today, what better place than the Mush Hole to conduct another official cover-up and whitewash, now that the push is on by the feds to do a final and definitive cleanup of all those lingering little bones. Well, that's perhaps kind of obvious, but when you follow the money, as they say, the story gets a lot worse. Enter stage left another Goomba in our sordid tale, former Kamloops Council Chief Shane Gottfriedson. Formerly of the Aboriginal underworld, and now a key native broker in the rapid Chinese takeover of Canada's west coast. Shane Gottfriedson apparently has made a deal with both Ottawa and Beijing to disinter all the mass graves on the coast, not only at residential schools, but at present body dumping sites all over northern BC and the Highway of Tears. He'll disinter all those mass graves in exchange for a major cut of the lucrative $40 billion oil and gas export industry from BC to China. Well, conveniently, Shane Gottfriedson also serves as the godfather of the Aboriginal criminal syndicate known as Red Alert. Yes, criminals, folks. They deal drugs and they handle the contract killings and body disposals between, guess where? Kamloops and the West Coast. Well, according to one of my sources in the Kamloops Band Council, quote, Shane knows where all the bodies are, and there's a hell of a lot more than them than those 215 children in the ground. Well, like all gangsters, Shane camouflages himself behind a legitimate business, although not an especially impressive one. He runs the local Tim Hortons Donuts franchise on the Kamloops Indian Reserve. But the homely, nice guy stories run about him in the local media that depict him serving Timmy double-doubles to other smiling Indians belie the extent of Shane Gottfriedson's reach. Because in June 2019, Gottfriedson helped convince Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to buy the strategic Trans Mountain Pipeline, TMP. He bought it from Kinder Morgan and allowed Gottfriedson's own Aboriginal company that he calls Project Reconciliation. Ouch. And that company was allowed to scoop up a majority control of the new Trans Mountain Pipeline. TMP is now the largest supplier of oil and gas to China, doubling Canada's oil exports to that country, and quite amazingly ending America's traditional monopoly of all Canadian oil exports. And Shane Gottfriedson's Project Reconciliation is at the center of it all. A native-run sellout to China. Well, significantly, and this is quite interesting, this historic move by Trudeau that locked Canada now into a permanent trade dependency with China in alliance with Aboriginal businessmen, that occurred only 2 weeks after Justin had publicly admitted to genocide in Canada. What's the connection, you say? Well, under international and contract law, all outstanding issues of contention between parties must be resolved before final agreements can be signed and made legal. Well, Gottfriedson knew very well that the United Nations would never enforce its own genocide convention against Canada, by which Trudeau normally would be facing a war crimes trial right now. And so Gottfriedson and his tribal partners reached an understanding with Trudeau that little matter of murdered Indians, past or present, was off the table, provided they got a piece of the upcoming action with China. Gottfriedson's Band Council's disposal of the still undisclosed bones in the Kamloops mass grave site, under the guise of investigating it, is part of his price of admission into the club. Accordingly, we can expect the destruction of similar graves across the country to continue at the hands of the Mounties, coroners, and the federal government, with, of course, the churches standing in the wings and applauding. Well, none of these maneuvers are new. It's business as usual in Canada. Only the actors are new. Murdering Indigenous families has always been as intrinsic to a resource-hungry capitalism as is buying stock options. But now, in true neocolonial fashion, the killing is being done in Canada by the Aboriginals to themselves, whether by a Murray Sinclair or a Shane Gottfriedson. The West Coast is ground zero for this latest phase in the Canadian Holocaust, and a linchpin in the new geopolitical battle between China and America for control of this continent, and especially control of Canada's liquid natural gas, oil, uranium, and water. Trudeau and his Aboriginal partners have chosen their side. It's now up to the rest of us to find a different way. As for those children in the ground and what put them there, their appearance is really a mirror into which we can see ourselves and the nature of who we are and our culture. The disappeared children are part of the judgment under which we all stand that no amount of reconciliation babble will resolve. Instead of mimicking Joe Pesci's accomplice mother and handing the killers the means for them to dispose of the evidence of their own crime, we must upset the entire bloody table by first mourning from our hearts and stepping back from its entire bloody arrangement. To honor the dead in more than the blithe, self-serving manner in which Canadians so excel, let us set aside all of July as a national month of mourning and non-cooperation. By refusing to play along with the lies and the agendas of the killers in office, we may begin to find a different way to think and to be that no longer rests on our ignorance and complicity and on the suffering of the innocent. We can only launch our own independent tribunal into our homegrown genocide if we begin this process of inner renewal and break our bonds of complicity. Our challenge in doing this is a difficult one, but it's summed up very well by a man called Ryan Mallon, who wrote a book called My Traitor's Heart. He was a white South African who wrote in the post-apartheid era. And his thoughts, and this quote is remarkably relevant to and directed to we Euro-Canadians. Take it to heart. Even those of us who could face our own crimes could not end the brutal system that had killed so many other people. Because as a people, our spirit was held prisoner even more than the ones we oppressed. All our talk of justice and reconciliation was just empty words because we could not come to terms with something we did not understand, namely ourselves. Our system had to fall before our eyes could be opened. Our system had to fall before our eyes could be opened. Murderbydecree.com, republicofcanada.ca. Take it to heart and act. This is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice. More coming.